With Rome at its peak, very few dared to challenge it. However, Arminius was no such case. Contrary to previous leaders who confronted it while it was still growing, Arminius had the nerve to stand up against a strong and consolidated empire. Although his battles failed to resolve the war, he still achieved the remarkable feat of never being defeated by the Romans. This video tells the full story of this prince of the Cherusci who defied the might of Rome. Arminius was born around 18 BC into a Germania divided between alliances with Rome and the desire for independence, the son of Segemer, the Cherusci chief. Raised within the pro-Roman clique, he was schooled in Latin and trained in Rome's army, earning the citizenship and the rank of equit. By the time Arminius was born, Rome and the Germanic tribes were experiencing heightened tensions. Following Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul, the defeated tribes were divided into provinces of the Roman Republic. The winners did not pay enough attention to the territories of the Gauls in the years following Caesar's takeover, especially near the Germanic border. The reason for that was the many internal struggles within the Roman Republic. Such carelessness with the Gaul territories spawned several rebellions by the tribes living there, which were suppressed by the Romans over time. Following Augustus's nomination as the first Roman emperor, the Roman legions increased their presence in Gaul, and many were stationed on the Rhine. While these troops succeeded in keeping some order in the empire, they failed to stop the Germanic invasions. In 16 BC, the leader of the Sicambri tribe led a successful attack against a Roman army. This led to losing the eagle of the Legio V Alaudi and triggered a severe reaction from the Roman Empire. Emperor Augustus increased his military presence in Germania in the following years. Drusus, his adopted son, waged a successful campaign against the Sicambri, Frisi, and Chauci tribes in 12 BC, arguably retrieving the lost eagle. He led a fruitful raid as far as the river Weser in 11 BC, and reached the Elbe by crossing the Cherusci territory. This way, in the early 1st century AD, Germania was on its way to being fully Romanized. Meanwhile, several young Germanic noblemen joined the legions as auxiliaries to the Roman army. Around 4 AD, Arminius led a Cherusci detachment of the Roman auxiliary forces, perhaps after having fought in the Pannonian Wars in the Balkans. He then returned to northern Germania in 7 or 8 AD, where the Romans had control of areas east of the Rhine and were hoping to expand their influence on the Weser and Elbe rivers. Arminius had disliked Drusus's excursion into the Cherusci lands a few years earlier. He also disapproved of Roman culture and believed that they treated the Germanic people unfairly. This is the reason Arminius secretly began plotting to rally several Germanic tribes against the Roman Empire.
By 7 AD, Publius Quintilius Varus had become the new governor of Germania. Albeit not an experienced military man, Varus was provided with 3 legions, numerous auxiliaries, and cavalry, in case he faced any fighting during his planned peaceful Romanization of Germania. Varus relied on his Germanic allies, including Arminius, unaware that the latter had been secretly plotting against Rome since his return to Germania. He needed to unite the Germanic tribes, which had mutual feuds. Arminius started by convincing communities to ask for Roman help with different local issues. Some needed protection from thieves, others required escorts for supply convoys, and some wanted to avert civil unrest. While many faulted Varus's oppressive rule for the uprising, historians claim that he was trying to do right by the region. He spread his troops out as requested by the Germanics and focused on legal and administrative matters. Varus's strategy consisted of crossing the Rhine, marching towards the Cherusci's territory, resupplying the garrisons along the way, and setting up camp in lands deemed pacified. But now, the Cherusci were able to monitor the Romans' movements, which meant that they would have a longer journey back to their winter headquarters. During the march, the Romans would be vulnerable to an ambush in favorable terrain for Arminius. In 9 AD, external difficulties obliged Varus and his legions to move out of camp. Arminius had launched the attacks himself, unbeknownst to Varus. Arminius advised him to send troops to stop the unrest, splitting up the Roman forces. Having received these reports from Arminius, Varus immediately gathered his army and left to face the enemy. By doing so, Verus undermined his troops by sending out several small detachments, then marching with an army encumbered by a large baggage convoy and camp followers, including the soldiers' families. Arminius offered Cherusci support, but Segestes, another tribal leader, alerted Verus to a trap planned by Arminius. Segestes wanted him to reject Arminius' offer, arresting him as a traitor. But Verus refused to believe Segestes, possibly because of a personal problem he had with Arminius. Verus perhaps assumed that Segestes was nursing a grudge and wanted revenge. On the morning of September the 7th, 9 AD, the Roman army got ready to leave. Arminius told Verus that he needed to prepare his own forces. Arminius left some Cherusci to act as guides, but they were in fact spies. Verus was unaware that Arminius was assembling a Germanic army, including the Cherusci and Chauci. When they arrived the next day in the Teutoburg forest, the Germanics charged at the Romans. Arminius corralled the enemy soldiers within the forest and a swamp, stopping them from regrouping. The swampy, densely wooded terrain prevented the Roman legions from maneuvering effectively. Verus had made a dreadful mistake by relying on Arminius and aggravated the situation by positioning his legions poorly, underestimating the Germanic tribe's strength and exaggerating his ability to intimidate the rebels. Verus decided to set up camp after a torrential downpour, given how difficult it was to push ahead. He convened his war council to discuss the situation. The Romans attempted to escape, but fell into another of Arminius' traps. The narrow passage between the forest and the swamp had been blocked by a trench and an earthen wall, putting the Germanic alliance at an advantage. A failed attempt to breach the wall led to desertion of some officers and a relentless Germanic offensive. The 30,000-strong army was destroyed without any chance of recovery. Most legionnaires were killed on the spot, while some senior officers were led into the sacred groves and ruthlessly sacrificed. 3 legions, 17, 18, and 19, were massacred, along with 6 cohorts of auxiliary infantry and 3 cavalry wings. Arminius ordered his men to find Verus's body among the dead and sent his head to Maroboduus, chief of the Marcomanni, hoping to influence him to join his revolt. He probably did this because he did not expect a total victory against the Romans, trying to build a tribal coalition for a possible protracted war. But Maroboduus had no interest in such an alliance and sent Verus's head home for a proper burial. Rome was shaken by this defeat, since only the Alps protected the city from a potential Germanic invasion. Suetonius reported that Augustus was profoundly afflicted, lamenting the loss of his men several times. He went into mourning, grew a beard and hair for a month, roaming the palace while banging his head on the walls, crying out, "Quintilius Verus, give me back my legions." Then Augustus summoned his legions to the palace. Legions 1 Germanica and 16 were placed to reinforce the Roman defenses, but legions 17, 18, and 19, destroyed by Arminius, were never rebuilt, and their titles were forever abandoned. The Romans started planning their revenge. Having served in the Roman army, Arminius understood the Romans' ability to bounce back and their unrelenting determination to hunt down their enemies. Following the battle, there were intense negotiations, and Arminius tried to unite the tribes against Rome, while the Romans harshly threatened those who joined. In the following year, 10 AD, Tiberius, Augustus' heir, headed the Roman counterattack. Tiberius was promptly deployed to reinforce the Rhine frontier and massed 8 legions along the provinces of Upper and Lower Germania. Despite expecting a Germanic invasion, Arminius and his troops scattered towards home, displaying their spoils. Tiberius then undertook punitive expeditions against the Germanic tribes. The Roman reputation was severely damaged, requiring years of grueling campaigns to begin to recover. In 11 AD, Germanicus Julius Caesar, who had acquired experience in Pannonia, joined Tiberius on the Rhine frontier. With Augustus aging, Tiberius returned to Rome in 13 AD to assure the succession to the Roman throne. Nearly 5 years have now passed since the Teutoburg catastrophe, and until 14 AD, the Romans had not achieved any major victories over the Germanics. Several tribes saw it as particularly useful to start allying themselves with Arminius against Roman control. There were even Cherusci, headed by their uncle, Inguiomer, who hadn't supported the initial attack, but who then joined Arminius' side. In spite of this growing support, Segestes, a leader of the Cherusci, and also Arminius' father-in-law, still preferred to remain loyal to Rome. And it is obvious that this eventually undermined his authority and popularity within the tribe. Retaliating for this endorsement, Arminius ordered his allies to arrest his father-in-law. Segestes then somehow managed to send his own son, Segimundus, to ask the general Germanicus for help. With Segimundus' assistance, Germanicus succeeded in freeing Segestes and capturing some of Arminius' allies, including his wife Thanelsda, at the time pregnant. One can only picture the moment when Arminius' wife, who also happened to be Segestes' daughter, found herself face to face with her father, who was now free and also on the enemy side. Notwithstanding past grudges, Germanicus, with Segestes' son's defection and some other Germanic warriors who had quit to follow Arminius, spotted an opportunity. All the evidence suggests that not only had this son of Segestes fought against Rome, but that he had also defiled the corpse of the general Publius Varus. Given this rebellious background, the reigning emperor, Tiberius, decided to pardon all those involved. The exiled were not only given a place to live in the empire, but also a lifetime pension. This strategy not only secured the loyalty of these new allies, but also weakened Arminius' position by undercutting his internal support. On hearing that his father-in-law had permitted his pregnant daughter to be imprisoned, Arminius was enraged. As Tacitus put it, Arminius said that the Romans were cowards and lacked the nerve to stand up to him, which is why they went after his wife. At that point, referring to Germanicus, Arminius said, "We have defeated Augustus and his heir Tiberius. Why should we cower before an inexperienced teenager and his mutinous army?" Arminius was referencing the rebellion that had taken place among Germanicus' soldiers following Augustus' death. Now having captured some of Arminius' allies, Germanicus decided to escalate his chase. As he pressed on, Arminius took advantage of the rough and muddy terrain and managed once again to attack the Romans in a swampy forest and score a small victory. His uncle, Inguiomer, then suggested attacking the Romans in open terrain, but the attempt was unsuccessful, mainly due to the Roman army's greater experience in such conditions. Throughout the following 2 years, the Romans, led by Germanicus, continued their raids against various Germanic tribes that had allied themselves with Arminius and recovered one of their banners that had been lost. Nonetheless, they were unable to confront Arminius and his soldiers during this period. The Romans' image was heavily tied to their ability to avoid any kind of defeat, however small. Every time they carried out an expedition, it felt as if they were engaging in a mind game. It was not a question of utterly defeating a tribe, but of conveying the idea that the Romans were invincible. When they withdrew strategically, it not only showed their military strength, but also sent a clear message: the Romans were powerful and strong-willed. Yet, with every expedition he undertook, Germanicus faced a challenge: how to achieve a balance between strength and agility in his expeditions. This is why he aimed to cause destruction and spread terror over a wide area, displaying Roman military capabilities. Withdrawing without incurring heavy losses was the crux of this strategy. The objective was to sow fear in the tribes, persuading them that resisting was pointless. Despite not having won any major victories after Teutoburg, the mere fact of having avoided significant defeats boosted Arminius' reputation. Throughout the winter months, Germanicus spent time preparing for battle, uniting all 8 legions into a single force. The empire's western provinces, although faced with challenges, sent grain, horses, and pack animals to strengthen the army. The strategic choice of moving the army by water, sailing along the North Sea coast, and landing inside enemy territory meant that almost 1,000 boats had to be built. The diplomatic campaign to attract Germanic leaders to the Roman side continued as well, resulting in some important defectors, such as Segimur, who was Segestes' brother. Alongside the practical arrangements, Germanicus took advantage of those months to focus his attention on improving the health and morale of his men. He visited the winter barracks hospitals, talked to the soldiers, and extolled their feats of courage, giving them the morale they would need later on. Then, in the spring of 16 AD, Germanicus was set to continue his pursuit and put an end to Arminius for the last time. By joining the squadron in the territory of the Batavi, an allied tribe, the Roman army started preparing for the campaign. By sending a small column to attack the Chatti, Germanicus learned of an attack on the Roman fort close to where Varus's disgrace had taken place. This was a prelude to the ensuing showdown. But before that, the tombs that Germanicus had built for the soldiers in Teutoburg were razed to the ground by native enemies, and this heightened tensions. Arminius found out that the Roman army was assembled at the river Weser. Among the Roman soldiers, there was someone quite special to him, his brother. However, Arminius' brother was not a prisoner, but an auxiliary soldier in the Roman army. His name was Flavius. When Arminius and his father had defeated the legions at Teutoburg in 9 AD, Flavius had not been with them. He was in Illyria, helping the Roman army in an uprising, where he lost one of his eyes. Once Arminius heard that Flavius was with the other soldiers on the river Weser, he attempted to find a way to meet up with his brother. The two succeeded in meeting and talking on the riverbank, but they were unable to reach an agreement. Flavius asked Arminius to surrender, promising that the Romans would have mercy on them. On the other hand, Arminius urged Flavius to stand up for his people and his roots. The two began to argue, and Flavius almost got into a scuffle with Arminius. Arminius realized that his brother had decided to stay loyal to Rome, but he thought, why not try to convince other Roman soldiers to desert the army and come over to my side? He decided to send emissaries to the Roman camp to try to convince the soldiers to desert. To do so, they offered great sums of money, land, and wives. In an attempt to further undermine Roman morale, Arminius presented the offer to desert in Latin, letting it be known that some of the former Roman soldiers were already fighting on his side. As his envoys made this offer, Arminius decided to retreat to a strategic position in a sacred forest. There were rumors among Germanicus' soldiers of a night attack on the Roman camp, and this brought a certain amount of tension. Germanicus took precautions and decided to keep his legions on alert. As a seasoned general, he knew that his soldiers were probably distressed and afraid. To assess the morale of his troops, Germanicus decided to disguise himself with a hood made of animal skin, silently walking through the tents at night, listening to the soldiers' conversations. As he went around the camp to find out how the soldiers were feeling, Germanicus was surprised by the soldiers' faith in and concern for him as their general. Early the next morning, he addressed his army, presenting a cunning strategy. Having spotted the vulnerable features of the Germanics, he pointed out the effectiveness of the Roman pilum, gladius, and breastplate. The commander instigated the legionaries to attack quickly and harshly, drawing attention to the Germanics' vulnerability, as they lacked strong armor and shields. The tactical difference between the two armies was obvious, and Germanicus wanted to take advantage of it. Arminius simultaneously drew up a strategy to confront the Romans on the hills of Edistaviso, once again making effective use of the sloping terrain and the woods in his rear. With Gaul and Germanic auxiliaries leading the way, followed by 4 legions under Germanicus, the battle was set to rage. There were also 2 cohorts of the Praetorian Guard and a strategic assortment of cavalry that deployed the Roman army to face the Germanic rebels. Notwithstanding the drawbacks of the terrain, the Romans excelled in battle tactics and managed to push back the Germanics, putting even Arminius in a perilous situation, nearly being captured. Apparently, when the battle begun, some of the Cherusci disobeyed Arminius' orders, dashing forward and quickly being pushed back by Roman cavalry. Under Germanicus, the Roman infantry pressed forward with determination, confronting and repelling the Germanics. Striving to change the tide of battle, Arminius led an attack against the Roman archers, but was met with stiff resistance from the auxiliary heavy infantry. Arminius, wounded and aware of the impending defeat, chose to escape by smearing his face with his own blood to conceal his identity. It was rumored that Germanic auxiliaries, perhaps from the Caucasian tribe, facilitated his escape. The Germanic army, in disarray and under intense Roman attack, suffered significant losses. While Tacitus does not give specific statistics, the Roman casualties were fairly small, and all of Germanicus' soldiers celebrated the victory. Despite the early defeat, the Germanics were far from giving up. They established their position again, choosing strategic terrain between a tricky swamp and a woodland near a river. They built a fence similar to one used in Varus's ambush. The German infantry took cover near the bastion, while the cavalry moved into position in the wooded areas a little further back, ready to attack the Roman rearguard. Fully aware of the enemy presence, the Romans headed by Germanicus decided to fight another battle in open country. Letting the cavalry cover open terrain, they divided the infantry into 2 units. The first attack met with difficulties and some Roman casualties. After rearranging the forces, Germanicus brought in slingers and marksmen, who succeeded in defeating the Germanic warriors who were standing at a longer distance, destroying their shields and armor. Germanicus spearheaded the breakthrough with 2 Praetorian cohorts, while the Roman forces advanced into the woodland terrain to seize this tactical advantage. The Germanics' numerical advantage then became a handicap, as the Romans, more skilled in close combat, managed to turn the tide. Probably still recovering from recent wounds, Arminius took a minor role in the second battle. His uncle, Guiomir, took command, although this did not prevent the Germanics from suffering heavy casualties. At the end of the day, Germanicus withdrew a legion to start setting up camp, and raised another trophy to celebrate the victory. This decisive victory prompted some tribes to swear allegiance to the Roman Empire. Following this, Germanicus had the bold idea of bypassing the Germanics by sea to take them by surprise, but it ended up failing. Over 1,000 ships carrying legionnaires to their destination were hit by a storm that destroyed a significant part of the army. Emperor Tiberius, already pleased with the victories achieved and well aware of the risks involved in continuing the campaign, decided it was time to stop. The effort and resources allocated to the temporary conquering of forests and swamplands no longer seemed to justify the endeavor. The quest to conquer Germania had ended, and although he had lost to the Romans, Arminius was also victorious for having succeeded in removing Roman influence from the region. On his return to Rome, Germanicus was celebrated with a triumph, a feast in honor of his victories. Everyone in Rome was keenly anticipating Germanicus' return. Upon his arrival, he was feted with a triumph for his victories. Wearing ceremonial robes, 2 cohorts of the prestigious Praetorian Guard were waiting to welcome him. But such was the respect for the general that all 9 cohorts wanted to attend this historic moment, a mark of respect for the leader who vindicated Rome. The whole Roman celebration unfolded before the eyes of Arminius' son, who was quite young at the time and had been born into captivity. Having successfully warded off the threat of Roman occupation, Arminius had to deal now with tribal fights breaking out again in Germania, and his own uncle and greatest ally Guiomir now wanted to take over. As a result, Arminius' peace of mind was short-lived, and just 3 years after the Roman troops left Germania in 19 AD, he was killed by his own relatives at the age of 37. By a twist of fate, these were the same people who had made Arminius the supreme leader of the entire Germania. The internal power struggle was so intense that the Cherusci had to beg Rome to intervene and send them a king years later. And do you know who Rome sent? Do you remember Flavius, brother of Arminius? His son, Italicus, was sent by the then Emperor Claudius to be the new Cherusci king. As a result, Rome just had to watch and wait until the Germanics needed its help again. If you enjoyed learning more about the history of Roman revenge in Germania, please like and subscribe to the channel.